Hi, welcome to McDirk's. May I take your order?
Yes, please. I'll have a large order of colon cancer with a side order of hypertension and a large cup of diabetes, please.
So that will be a Big Mac, fries, and a...
Yes, please. Thank you.
All right, drive up.
Peace and blessings. This is Mwalim, DaPhunkeeProfessor. So we had a blizzard, and so we had power outage, and we were out for we went out Tuesday morning, and it's now going on to Wednesday evening, and supposedly we're supposed to have power back in an hour or two. But the thing that I've observed over the last couple of storms is something that I need to share with my neighbors. We had a storm back in 2013, power goes out, and what I notice in regard to the energy company Eversource is they have a propensity when the power goes out to serve first the areas that, let's just say, the economically advantaged live in. This has nothing to do with race, this is purely economy. If you live in a poor part of town, you're not going to see an Eversource repair truck probably for about a day and a half, because they all go right to the wealthy parts of town. Now, I don't know if it's that the wealthy pay more for electricity, socioeconomic demographic situation where it's like, okay, well, they're rich people, so they need their power faster. And then, of course, in a lot of those parts of town, the power doesn't even go out. You know, Cape Cod's always in danger of losing power during a storm because we have above ground wires, and above ground wires, snow, wind, boom, your power goes. So we had a heavy windstorm. So last weekend we had a power outage, and that's when the transformer in front of my house caught fire. Whole pole was on fire, and that was scary enough. But then when I'm calling 911, first time they don't answer, second time I'm put on hold 3 times, and then what I'm told by the dispatcher, when I finally do get the dispatcher, her response to me is, "We'll try to get to it." I'm looking at something on fire, and you're telling me you're gonna try to get to it? Well, you know, again, public service in the lower economic parts of town. And I'm saying lower economic because I've got neighbors of every race and hue. This is not a racial thing, this is an economic thing to consider. So, very important thing, by the way, for all you people watching this who live Cape Cod area, you want to invest in a generator for your house. Reason being, you want to run heat, you might have to keep your refrigerator on, and you might have to keep this going for several days. And so if you have to do this, generator is a key thing to have. It's a thing of, you know, as an investment. Some people go the extra distance and actually have them hooked into their circuit breaker so they can power their whole house off of this generator, which is not a bad idea if you have it like that. But even if you just have the simple kind that you can get for camping, just to give yourself heat, lights, and even, you know, make yourself a cup of coffee, it's a good thing to have. But nonetheless, what you have to look at is the basic fact of we're all paying the same electric bill, we're all being charged the same rate. But the question I have, and maybe one day we can actually get a real answer from Eversource, how come we're not all getting the same service? So peace and blessings. I'm here with Eddie Ray Johnson, my brother from the GroovaLottos.
What's up?
And the conversation we were having that we want to let you all in on is what I refer to as the John Henry complex. Now, the John Henry complex, of course, relates to the legend of John Henry, the story of John Henry. And if you're unfamiliar with that, John Henry, as the song goes, was a steel-driving man, which means that he was one of those people who used to cut through rock with a hammer and a spike, cutting through mountains and so forth, and, you know, would lay down the cuts so they could put dynamite in place and blow through stone. This was part of, cutting through for the railway, cutting mountains and so forth. Well, he did this with a hammer and spike. John Henry was a steel-drivered man. Well, what happens is they now come up with a machine, a big drill that can do the same thing, so they pit John Henry against the drill. And John Henry beats the drill and then drops dead of a heart attack just after he beats the drill. John Henry was a steel-drivered man. Well, the metaphor of John Henry is the entire concept of the black man who has to beat the machine to prove that he's of value. And sometimes it's not about beating the machine. Maybe what John Henry should have done was learn how to work the machine, how to run the drill. That's what would have been of value to John Henry. Because, unfortunately, what the concept that black people have bought into is that we have to prove ourselves. And it's not really a matter of having to prove ourselves as much as it's a matter of having to do for self, having to provide for self, having to figure out how to work this system for self.
Yes.
That's what it's about. And, I have to prove myself. I have to, this is completely contained within, I believe it's always attributed to Booker T. Washington, the statement that you have to be twice as good to be considered an equal. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes it has to be 7 times as good. Even if, say you're working in the warehouse and you have this guy who can move 3 boxes, so the brother has to now move 21.
Right.
And,
Right. And then the brother's going, well, you didn't have to move. You didn't have to move 21 boxes. And the man says, well, I'm not trying to prove I'm an equal.
That's it.
And that's what it comes down to. The brother is right. Sometimes it's not trying to prove you're equal. It's trying to prove that you can run it. Take charge.
It's not about prove, because what happens is that's a distraction. Trying to change somebody's mind is a distraction. Trying to just navigate your situation, that's what it's supposed to be about. It's not about proving yourself. It's not about proving anything.
Right.
If somebody has bought into something, they bought into it.
Right.
And there's no changing their mind, and there's no point in even trying to change their mind. What you now have to do is just change the direction you move in.
Right.
Move around them, and that's really part and parcel of what it is. So, do a self-assessment, because the other factor is with the metaphor of the John Henry complex. Think about hypertension and heart disease among black people and the prevalence among black males, and the amount of stress and pressure, the high-risk group, the black executives in predominantly white companies, and that kind of thing and situation that's going on for them. Mm-hmm. That's the John Henry complex.
Right.
I think about people who work in corporate settings, and then there's always a different expectation put upon, I've noticed, that black worker in the executive, and there's always, of course, the question as to whether or not they actually deserve the position. You possibly just got that position for affirmative action. The fact that you're better educated and better qualified than I am doesn't amount to anything. The fact of the matter is, you got the job that a good white person should have gotten.
That's right.
But you only got it because of affirmative action, not because of your qualifications, although your qualifications are superior. Mm-hmm. And your qualifications are only superior because of affirmative action, because you would only have access to those opportunities because of affirmative action. So you therefore don't even deserve the education that you received.
That's right.
That's right. I mean, that's how deep it gets.
That's how it goes.
And you think about people. I look at academia, and I look at the fact that this is the exact same kind of thing that sometimes your administration will try to play. This is the John Henry complex, and you stop and look at yourself, and you look at the people around you, and it's like, really, why is there always this stress on do this, prove yourself, and this pressure is not being applied to anybody else, and what's being accomplished is never acknowledged, or if it's acknowledged, it's tacitly acknowledged, and it's here again, it's the application of the John Henry complex. Mm-hmm. You're supposed to endure at a different rate.
Right.
So, do a check of your circumstances. Make sure you're not suffering from the John Henry complex, because it can be fatal. We're talking heart disease. We're talking diabetes. All of these things that are brought on by the stress. We're talking cancer. Mm-hmm. All of these things that are brought on by the stress and the stresses that are placed upon us simply by living up to the John Henry complex. No need to beat the machine if you know how to run the machine.
Amen to that, brother.
So, signing out at this point.